those lurkers in Twitchland. See how tonight's chat shapes up. Start off with my usual talk. There's a guy going, hey, there's Wolfie. How's it going? Haven't seen you in a few weeks. How are things with you? Yeah, I know the feeling. I mean, I'm doing a lot of my own stuff, but yeah, daily I feel like I'm muddling a little bit. I just have so many little things going that I'm trying to pull together, plus plus some chaos since we got back from trip 1 and about to go on trip 2. So it's been definitely been a little weird. I mean, those aren't bad problems to have, but it's like wow, I need to kind of get a breather for a couple days and kind of reorient. Yeah, see a few other people, see if they pop in and get rolling. In the meantime, I'll give my usual spiel pitch. Watching From the Tomes on Twitch TV/From the Tomes. If you're watching this on Twitch, you know where to find me, but think about going over and jumping on YouTube. There's some custom content there for YouTube, and I will be adding more throughout the coming months. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to get in on the live chat, such as tonight, where we'll have the finest minds in gaming, or at least the people who watch my channel, who are the finest minds in gaming, talk about various topics, plus work chats throughout the week in which I work on my ongoing game projects, primarily the Tales of the Harrowed Land RPG, and additional story and scenario development. And you can do that at From the Tomes on Twitch. Find everything at Fox and Board Games and foxandboardgames.com on Twitter and Facebook. I'm sorry, Fox and Board Games on Twitter and Facebook, and then foxandboardgames.com for the website. So, as always, if you haven't already, hey, there's Tom. How's it going? If you haven't already, like, subscribe, follow these various channels. This is becoming a thing. Viewership is growing. It seems like every week I pick up a few new viewers, and I hope it will become a kind of a mainstay in my life in addition to working on games and other creative projects. So yeah, that's where we're at, friends. So the GM overdoes it. That's our topic for tonight. As we know, our topics tend to be some of them are more focused than others. I've had a lot of people, like, every time I bring up, I got my fancy Boba Fett mug, before the book of Boba Fett. This is when Boba Fett was still cool. This mug comes from the old days. I'd have it at least a decade and a half, probably longer, but yeah, we've gone, every time we talk about dynamics in games, invariably people start talking about some issue with a game master. Oh, who knows? They could be talking about me, or Tom, or Neil, or Blake, or whoever, or Russ. I don't know. I don't know. Russ has run a lot of games. Wolfie's run a lot of games. I know we've played games. We've played several games together, but I don't know if you've ever run a game. I'm sure you have. I mean, you've been doing this as long as the rest of us, so I'm sure you have. But I'm not familiar with your game master history. But it's an interesting inversion. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of thing. I think you decide you're going to do it or you're not. Like I think Curzon. Yeah. Well, right, yeah. Does the game master overdo it? Right. This is a redundant comment. I mean, it's like Blake was saying, we haven't even seen like a fraction of what he has written up. I'm like, that's the way it is, man. Like, that's just, and it's like every time we've brought up player dynamics, gaming dynamics on this chat, inevitably, I mean, Nikki's got a couple really good stories. I don't know if she'll be on tonight, but she's got some great stories in terms of, game masters who not only overdo it in that sense, but are just super heavy handed, and just have to have things go a certain way. And that's a way of overdoing it too. So, I mean, Neil was kind of kidding before when he said about, of course, yeah, the game master could overdo it, but what's it? And I know he was being cheeky, but that's a good question. Like, what are we even talking about here? Yeah, I mean, we talked a good deal about that, and I talk a lot about this in my daytime chat. So I know you've been on one or two of them, or a few of them, and I talk about to what degree I prepare, and I overdo it. I'm very guilty of this, and that's why I thought it'd be kind of a cool chat because, my one chat was all about problem players, and again, that actually was interesting because there were so few people who were willing to actually talk in that chat. And I think it's because they felt like they were picking on their friends, but they were very quick to start pointing out like problematic game master stuff. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I think it's like, I don't know, I think I liken it to when I have a critique in a class and nobody really wants to criticize other student work, but yet then they'll argue with me about something. And I'm like, I'm perfectly okay with that. Full disclosure, I'm perfectly okay. I'd rather students argue with me and have their own opinion, even if it's something that we have to hash out and define. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here too. Is like, how do we define overdoing it? What's it? There is this whole range of stories, and I know I've hinted at quite a few here. I don't know if Peach is going to make it on tonight, but Peach and I have been in games with a certain infamous game master whose idea of overdoing it was just this total autocratic control of the game. I mean, so that's another way. It's kind of when we talked about problem players, like how do we define it? And is the player really the problem? Is it a problem with the group dynamic? Is it a problem with the players? With the play style, the difference in play style. But with a GM, it tends to be these kind of focused, and I'm not going to say attacks, but focused complaints. So, I mean, as far as overdoing it in terms of preparation, I guess we could start there. Overdoing it in terms of preparation, I confess I'm guilty. Horrendously guilty. As I've mentioned a couple times, the last full-scale game I really ran was Call of Cthulhu, Down Darker Trails. And I must have had probably between 20 and 30 pages of backstory for various NPCs, locations, historical events around this town that the players never would see. And even as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, the players are never gonna see any of this. And is it a problem? I mean, is it like, do I have a problem because I'm doing this? Is this something I should be aware of? I guess I'll get a cool background up. 'Cause people watch videos because of cool backgrounds. I think we all know that, right? I'll use the cool background that I had before. Um, I don't know, you know. So is it a problem? And yeah, Curzon's like, I see you're doing player handouts, tokens to roll 20 for 22 NPCs that might not be used. I mean, and that's exactly what kind of the first thought of mine about this topic was that it, like, in that context, overdoing it is overdoing it is defined as this extensive amount of prep. Let's see, I get this picture. Save image as. There we go. This extensive amount of prep that no one's probably ever going to see. So, I don't know. I mean, is it a problem or isn't it? Let's see. So, Wolfie says, I mean, it's all down to how much time you're willing to put in to do your prep. If you have the time and enjoy it, there really is no such thing as too much. Even if the PC's never knowing what's going on, but this helps you have those notes if they're ever needed. So, that's kind of my philosophy. Honestly, I have never really felt like I have done too much prep. I think part of why I feel that way. Let's see, is this the image I want? Yeah, that would be humorous image to put there, but that's not the image I want. All right, that's the image I want. Okay, there we go. We're gonna move you down there, Mr. Afreet. There. I don't think I've ever felt that I'm destroying my workspace here. I don't think I've ever felt that I put too much work into something. Um, I always feel like if it's going to be used at some point, even referentially, I haven't wasted any time or energy doing it. I think, and like I said, I've compared this to when I've talked to people who do any kind of other art, any kind of music. Thinking of, in particular, Wardruna, and talking to Einar Selvik about, making his own goatskin drum heads in the woods of Norway for a performance. Like, why didn't he just go out and buy a pre-made drum? And he said, well, because I know the difference. I know that I went and I made this drum and it's special to me and it's adding something. Even if and he always says, like, even if most people don't get it, I think some people do. I think some people feel differently or can feel that there's a difference in the music because I make everything myself and I take this extra time. Um, I kind of feel that way when I write for game stuff. I I don't think that my games are lesser because I have spent hours making this. Well, so that's the other whole topic, and that's the reality too. Is I'm looking to start publish stuff, and starting to publish stuff, and once you get to that point, you want to have as much content there as possible, especially after you read a good number of commercially available scenarios and pieces of content where you think, wow, it wouldn't have taken that much for them to really make this amazing by putting a little bit of extra research and work. And that's when I think you kind of make that leap and say, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe that's not overdoing it. I don't know, Curzon, what do you think? Do you think that you're overdoing it by having your 22 NPCs and tokens in Roll20 that people might never meet? I mean, I don't know. And also, I think that habitually creative process and habitually creative people does add something to it. I don't think I've ever felt that something was bad because of more detail. So, but I think we can segue into maybe the next part of this though, like at what point is it too much if the game master believes that they need to inflict all of this upon the players? And I'm going to say that in the most, um, you know, nicest terms possible because I've been in that situation. I mean, I might have even been that person, but that feels that, yeah. So, so exactly. So that's another thing. And I think as several of us talk about these ideas of pro DMing and DMing as a craft that is now being opened up as acceptable in mainstream culture, whereas before it was like, oh, you're sitting around playing a game, you're wasting your time. Now that there's actually this entire culture, an entire avenue to make it even, uh, you know, a broadly accessible hobby, if not a job, or a part time job, if not a full time job, I don't think the idea of over preparation is really an issue. I think the more work you put into things, the better the game is always going to feel to you. And that's how I felt too. When I was working on the Call of Cthulhu game, and then when the players kind of were set loose in it, and I've talked about this a little bit, and I think one of the stumbling blocks of that game is that it was very open source, very open world sandbox, and I think there weren't enough things to maybe cue them into this line of questioning and talking to all these NPCs. But at one point, I actually sat down to them and I said, just so you know, like all of these like all these shop owners, they aren't like two-dimensional people just to sell you things like in a video game. Like if you talk to them, they might know something. And the lights all kind of went on because they just weren't used to thinking like that. They were used to either gaming from other references like video gaming or D&D, in which things are always kind of seem to always, at least in the games they played up till that point, were very kind of standardized and cut out, and it was like kind of this gauntlet they followed to get to the end of an adventure. So I think that's the other thing. I think sometimes players don't realize when a game master has this huge wealth of info that they've set up. They have this huge amount of content they've set up that is there for the players to access. And in that regards, I don't think anyone's overdoing it. I don't think that the over preparation's a problem. But at the same time, I think what Wolfie said is correct. Like, I think if you enjoy doing it and if you have the time to do it. And it's interesting because I know that I'm on several channels for tabletop RPG. And I find it interesting that most people are in fact running pre-made content. And I know there's all the reasons for that. There are reasons some people aren't writers. Some people don't have this ability. Hey, there's Peach. So that's where we're going with this, PJ, because we've all known players or all known game masters who don't run a game. They have written a novel and they expect you to play a part in it, whether you like it or not. And that's thinking of a couple key situations that we were mutually privy to. And before you came on, I even mentioned that I was hoping you'd come on because that's kind of the next step in this. Is no the over prep. I mean, that's the thing. You have to be willing to let go of the preparation, right? Right. Exactly. Yeah. Before they break out the dice. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I don't think there's too much preparation at all. Like, I think if a game master like myself now, again, I've made it very clear that my favorite games are these quasi historical games. Even the game I'm writing, I count as quasi historical, even though it's in a fantasy world. I've done this ridiculous amount of real world language, history, culture plumbing of various eras. I mean, things that like most people I don't think ever even think about when they sit down to play a game. You know, how does a Roman bath actually work? You know, and I've actually really researched all this because I want it to be a believable experience. But I think that's the pivot that you have there is okay, but I have to realize this might be entirely about me and about my content development. Well, yeah, exactly. And again, I'm really big on language. I'm really big on linguistics. I'm really big on realistic language form for certain cultures and certain areas. And I think that is um I think that's something that a lot of people overlook. And I understand a lot of people. There's Nikki. How are you? Well, writing it down, I mean, that's a different thing. And that's why I was just saying, like, I think not everybody's a writer. I mean, I've been writing. I think I wrote my first short story at 10 or years old or something like that, you know, and or even maybe earlier. So not everybody's a writer. Not everybody wants to do that prep, has the ability to do that prep in terms of attention span or time. I mean, I think notes are a way to do it, like just like bullet points. And most of my stuff starts out as bullet points. The vast bulk of my game prep starts out as bullet points. And then I kind of transition it into paragraph form when it's absolutely necessary. You know, and as we were saying earlier, like I think a big issue is once it's in that paragraph form, you have to realize, and just exactly what Wolfie's saying right now, you have to realize that this material, and what Peach said before, your work is not necessarily precious to your players. Your players may not find all of that nearly as important as you do. And I think when a GM gets extra, as I say in the description here, I think it's when they feel that they're being disserviced by players who don't care about this 40 hours of work they did for the game. Well, yeah, and that's a big part of it, right? Like, I mean, part of this, and again, this is like a stereotype, but part of the gamer personality is like, oh, look how smart I am, you know, look at all this stuff I made up. I mean, that is really part of it, and that's fine. That's part of being a gamer, and every gamer I've ever met is definitely had a little bit of that in them, for better or for worse, you know, and that's why even I even always point to all the gamers I knew, growing up or even in high school and college, and I was like, man, that guy was annoying as you know what, but he was really smart, and I learned like a lot from him about something, in most cases. In most cases, I took something away from even players. I mean, I remember one of the few of the LARPers who I just regularly wanted to choke. I just like daily I thought about choking them, that I was in a game with them. But they were all pretty smart, and they all had some interesting stuff going on. And if you could sort through what we now know as various forms of, um, you know, of non-traditional thinking, and if we can sort through that and neuroatypicality, if we can sort through that, you realize there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Well, and I think it's a little bit of both. I think being that even now, even though it's become pop culture, I think most gamers live kind of outside of standard day to day, what we will call day to day mundane reality in terms of our interactions with society. I think it becomes a survival trait. I think part of all this becomes this survival mechanism. And it's kind of funny because I've said I've been not shy at all, like wow, man, we're all ADD and on the spectrum, right? Like it's, I mean, most gamers I know of historically, and back in 20, 30 years ago, nobody was diagnosed, so it was just this kind of collection of crazy personalities you had together. And but you made it work because everybody were creative thinkers. They had, they were interested in the same things. No, we didn't have those exactly. Well, exactly. Right. And I think we all are recognizing this. All of us who are now at an advanced age in life, I think all of us are realizing that now. Like, wow, we are those people. We have those traits, even though at the time we did not connect with them. Even as far as gendering, let's see. Good see, so still good. That's part of it, right? So yeah, oh, that's a great idea. I'm gonna steal that. Oh, Esslinger's another one. Esslinger does verge on that extra though. I mean, I'll just call it out right here. There were a couple scenarios Blake and I played with him where he was really not flexible in terms of what happened once we got into his world. He would be taking. I mean, he got better. He definitely got better as he got more experience and as he played LARPs. But I remember early on there were a couple games we played with him where we were like, "All right, dude, like, we're not in a novel. Like, we can go do something else, right?" So I mean, he's not Ransdale who would literally punish you from deviating. Well, I don't know. Esslinger did a couple times, but not Ransdale who like would literally punish you. You know. Well, absolutely, and he did have a little bit of that going on, and that's something Blake and I've joked about over the years. Like we'd be in a game with somebody else, and we'd be like, "Oh no, we're getting to the Steve novel level here," where it's like he had these amazing. His characters were amazing. His settings were amazing. But then I remember one game in particular. I don't know if Blake's lurking. I know he's not normally on around this time of night. He usually comes on about 8:30. But like we tried to deviate from this path, and he just couldn't handle it. He like really like became authoritarian about following this path. And I mean that's part of the other extra that I'm talking about here. And you know what? Probably when I was younger, I definitely probably did that too because my ideas were so smart and so brilliant. So I think this also comes with security, personal security, flexibility, and let's face it, I've learned a lot of this from being in a classroom. Your students aren't always going to act like these cookie cutter students that you want them to, and neither are your players or your game master. And oh yeah, Bill would like literally punish you for quote getting out of line in his games. I mean that was such a totally different level of ball busting, and no other way to say it. And again, it was a control thing. It was a power thing. Um, and I think that also came from rocks fall, you die. Yeah, basically. I think that's also insecurity. That's all these other issues. And again, these are things that now 20 to 30 years later, I can look back at some of those situations in gaming and I realize all of us combined, not, because I'm certainly not innocent. Everybody's ego, everybody's issues, everybody getting involved. Had the least amount. So that's interesting because I actually never played with him as a game master. I played with him. Yeah, well, exactly, and I think that's what. Oh, Trail, but you were just there to admire the scenery, and that's very. So another buddy of ours, and I don't know if Adam hasn't been on in a while, but another buddy of ours who's actually related to Adam, Joel. I mean, that's kind of what we've said about Joel too. Like Joel is really good stories, really good characters, but you get into his game and you're kind of just like, bullied into following this particular trail, of what or motivated to following a particular trail without much deviation. And of course, I've come to now think that's the worst type of game. Like, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of my early games were exactly like that. In fact, I know they were. But now, as a very, yeah. Well, yeah. And you know what? You find out, like, especially now that this whole concept of what gaming is has changed. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And I think that's a big part of it. And I've joked around about this. And, like last semester, I was sitting with a couple of my students just they were working on something talking about a D&D game, and I was just listening. And at first you're like, oh, I could play D&D with 20-year-olds. Then you listen to what their idea of a good game is, and you're like, no, we would none of us would be happy. Like I wouldn't be happy playing their game. They wouldn't be happy playing my game. I think it's a very different thing that evolves. But not necessarily, because I have been on a couple game boards, Facebook or Reddit or whatever, in which like people who are like, not generationally too far away from some of us are talking about something that happened in a game, and I'm just like, why did you even keep playing? Like the game master literally was just harassing you. Like why would you even keep playing? And it's an interesting dynamic. Like I don't know, I guess my time's too valuable that if I feel even that frustrated at an RPG game, like I'm not interested in playing it. I'll go work on something of my own. I'll go, watch TV. I don't know. I'll go watch reruns. I don't know. But like if I were in a situation with a game master who was being like that out and out mean to players, I'm like why would you put up with that? Well, so let's see, Wolfie. Yeah, so you have expectations early on. Yeah, I mean, I do set expectations. We had our session 0 for Tales of the Howard Land pen and paper game in person the other night, and I was very clear what kind of story I laid out. Like I didn't give them the details, but like what they could expect as far as, is it social, is it combat, is it investigative, how much interaction can you expect? Because I didn't want anybody to, one, make a character they were going to get totally bored playing. Two, I didn't want to create a game that they were going to be totally bored with and that they would not have fun with, right? But that's part of me having grown as a game master to go, it's really not all about me. It's really not all about me. It's showing off how great of a writer or a game master I am. It's about you guys interacting with this world and having fun. So let's see. I'm going to scroll back through the chat just a little bit because there's some cool stuff coming through. Hello, scroll. There you are. Okay. So Nikki, is this the guy with the hammock? Is Matt the guy with the hammock? Is that story? Because I was thinking of that story when I came up with this. So yeah, setting expectations. yes, it is. She says, the hammock man. Yeah, it's like Fahrenheit guy. That's a whole other story. I won't get into that. A whole argument that erupted about Celsius and Fahrenheit that totally derailed a social situation. Where I was just like, oh my God, this person. I mean, again, clearly they were functioning on a different spectrum, and to them it was really important to discuss this. And eventually everybody was like, oh God, I can't talk to you anymore. Let's see. So that's what is interesting, Wolfie. This group, when I first started it, and it's definitely shifted. We got 3 out of 6 players attending regularly now for a bunch of different reasons. Not interpersonal, not that anyone hates anybody, I don't think, but just other people have gone off to do some different things. But several of them came in from the video game world. And I remember during the first session, Andy in particular was totally skeptical about how an RPG even works. And then once he realized he could do anything, his whole idea of these things shifted, And he's a very good writer and role player, but he just never had been in a situation where a game master, he said he had tried playing once, and it was the type of experience we're talking about. That the game master was just totally heavy-handed, and he had no fun, and he got up and left. So that goes on. I've had discussions with friends about various games and LARPs they were in, where my cancel was, if you're not having fun, leave. And you know what? I even said that this past week, because we've had a couple people who are regulars drop out of the game for various reasons. And I said to everybody, I said, look, I don't take that personally. Especially if somebody just says to me, I need to take a break, I'm not having fun anymore. No problem. I mean, again, maybe 15, 20 years ago I would have been offended. But now I'm like, great. Because you know what? I'm at the point in life that I will absolutely not sit in a game I'm not having fun with. And I don't care if somebody gets upset because it's not worth anyone's time. Let's see. I've gamed as a player in 2 separate games run by my students. They were fairly good, enjoyable as one shots, but I couldn't see playing regular. Yeah, so Curzon is exactly that. It's play style difference. And again, the one student, he was so excited about this whole scenario he had come out with, and he's telling me all about it, and it was great because he and his friends had fun. But I'm thinking, man, I would have noped out of that one right away, because it's just so different from what I want now in a game. Whereas they probably get into one of my games, and depending on what I ran, if I ran like something like some of my games that are more investigative or a horror game, they'd be like, all right, where's the fight? When do I get to fight something with my, however many points of damage I can cause? And again, I like that too. So Peach asked friend Wick to join us her first D&D game, and I said sure, but let me talk to her both as we know we're getting into. Yeah, pretty dark, fucked up places. And the retort was, I wrote a graduate thesis on the effects of the Black Plague on the landscape and literature, and yeah, you're in. Yeah, exactly, right. And I mean, any of you who have played any of my games or been exposed to me, even as a player, you know that I do have levity, but a lot of my stuff gets really, really dark. In fact, I was just talking to another friend of mine who's also a gamer, but I don't think she's ever made it onto one of these, which is a shame because she's actually a real interesting person. But she was talking about various horror movies and stuff, and I was like, she's the same way. Like, she's really into horror and dark fantasy, and she's only talked about. She said there's only like 2 movies that have ever freaked me out or bothered me, and I said I haven't seen one of them, a Serbian film, which is about a snuff film, but apparently that's disturbing on a very different level. It's not a real snuff film, but it seems like it is, and there's a lot of questionable age-related perversions that go on. And I'm like, okay, but that's different. That's hitting this visceral. That's not horror to me. That's being disturbed at suffering. And I mean, maybe that's what horror really is. Because I say, like, monster movies don't scare me. Reading about massacres in the Ukraine scares me. It's like, that disturbs me. Not scares me, it disturbs me. So I do tend to, and that's one thing I've talked about when I was online yesterday. I was talking to some people about pro GMing. I think maybe Curzon was on. Maybe somebody. Yeah, Curzon. I knew he was lurking, and a couple other people were on. And I said, that's one thing that I do have to be aware of is that people have very different thresholds, and that kind of goes into what the topic is tonight. Like, I mean, I believe games can be as rough and uncensored as you want, as long as everybody is on the same page and they know what they're getting into. I have been in a game many years ago at a convention where a game master raped a female player's character. And there was no discussion of consent. There was no discussion of, will this bother you? And that to me was a case of a game master. Yeah, no, definitely not cool. And this person, we had played one game with him previously that got a little out of hand, but it was funny and nobody was bothered or offended. Then I played another game with him and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think this is cool because you're inflicting this on a player to demonstrate power. You're not doing it with a bunch of your buddies who you play with every week and doing something perverted to one of their characters is, the way your games go. This was at a convention. This was at a public space. Yeah, and that was creepy. That was like, and that's another example of not, fortunately I don't have as many of those. I have more accounts of players being creepy, Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And this guy apparently was a problem. And I didn't know this, but apparently on the local convention circuit, he was known to be a problem, and there were only a couple conventions where they still let him run. Yeah, percussive maintenance. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but to me, that goes beyond the flashcard notion. This to me was an abusive behavior. And again, I then was told afterwards that this person had a history of doing things that were problematic in games, especially with female players. So again, that was a whole other problem. That's a whole other example of the GM overdoing it, because that's not the GM overdoing it. That's like the GM violating a basic sense of social trust. Now, of course, this was quite a few years ago. I don't think that would happen today at a con, and if it happened, it would only happen once. But I have heard of things like that happening at cons. And I had a player, and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, that a player, a young woman who signed into an online game, and it was a horror game, but it ended up being like a torture porn kind of thing, and she didn't really care. I mean, she's a weirdo. She's into weird stuff, but she was like, the fact that this guy online started graphically describing these horrible things, in some cases sexually, that happened to these characters. Like, even if you tell people it is an 18 and over, you have to consent, I mean, there's still a point where you should get an idea as to what the thresholds are. So the consent flashcards, you've talked about that before, and that's actually kind of interesting. But again, that goes to me back to when I have a student who wants to write something or demonstrate something to me, and they want to have nudity or profanity or drug use, and I'm like, look, I'm an artist, okay? I went through art school. Like, very little you can do and say will shock me. But is there a reason to do it? Because you're not being cool or smooth by just shocking people in 2022. You know, like just using dirty words or showing breasts or whatever, or you know, drawing your friends having sex or whatever it is you think you're going to shock people with. It's really not shocking. It's not interesting. It's not cool. You know, if there's a reason to do it in a narrative or art context, these things can be mitigated. And I think in gaming, so we have some interesting comments. A little percussion makes fun of that. Damn it, it worked. Yeah. Well, seriously. Like, again, yeah, I'm old, yeah. And he was old school New Jersey, too. And again, I don't think you would have known this person, but he was at the convention at the same time we were, PJ. I mean, I'll say it, his name is Greg Barry. I mean, I'm not gonna hide who it was. And I didn't know if he's still around. I don't know anything about him, but we played a couple games with him, and he, again, his personality definitely eroded over time. Well, right. So the whole idea of social contract in these things, and that's a GM responsibility too, to determine. Thought raises means on RPG. We will talk about that at some point. That's an interesting statement. I have very diverse opinions on Wraith. More important in gaming, since we're enjoying it for free time. Yeah, I mean, I think the social contract is also just part of basic interaction. And I think now, especially that we've all been made so much more aware of these issues globally, socially, you know, I would like to think that person would not be able to do that in a game environment today and get away with it more than once. Or not get away with it at all. Do it more than once. But again, apparently at that time, this guy was known for treating players, especially female players, like this. So, well, right. And you know what? I saw that even on a much less stressful scale. I remember quite a few times in gaming environments where somebody would clearly have a meltdown. And again, now as going back and looking at this through different eyes, there was clearly some other issue there. And then be like, oh, that was just my character. I wasn't really mad. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I think that was you, you know? And these people I did stop eventually gaming with because it was just stressful. Those always play neutral alignments, and you say, well, I'm just playing my character and doing anything they want. Right. Similar personality. And when the person's a GM, they have the power to do anything they want, right? So Wraith, that's funny. I mean, I thought Wraith conceptually was an extremely interesting game. I was like, this is a really unique way to approach an RPG, to approach the shadow self, to approach the antagonist in these games. Would I ever have trusted 99% of the people walking the earth to ever play that game with them? Absolutely not. No. To me, Wraith was a social experiment. And again, there's so much about it that could have been interesting or was interesting in a broad, maybe as background material for another game, for Vampire or whatever. But yeah, this idea of playing this person's shadow, one, you're going to lose more friends over that than you ever will over Monopoly or Risk. Two, the idea that you're going to be able to trust most other players to really play this correctly. I mean, I don't even play Ars Magica with most people because of the amount of work it takes to play it correctly, to really have the spirit of the game. So yeah, that's I mean, this is kind of my whole philosophy in politics over the last 6 or so years, that if someone really wants to believe something and be vocal about it, I don't think I should stop them, because I think they should be as vocal as they want and let everybody know what they think. Let everybody know. And in gaming, we can kind of apply that, I'll say the name on my channel. I can't even going to say it, but let's look at Jeff Mock. I know at least a few of you know who Jeff Mock is. And people who will watch this later will know, even if not everybody here knows. But okay, so this is a guy who does all this in real life. Like, he's just a horrible person. I don't even care about saying that about the guy publicly, because everybody knows it. I've had experiences with this guy in which he has been manipulative and underhanded. And I know people personally in which he has been quite literally abusive. So again, I don't even care about the guy knowing that I'm talking about. He'd probably actually be thrilled I'm talking about him on my channel, even though he's, it would be negative attention. But, you kind of hope that people like this outing themselves, or this other guy, Greg, outing himself as an abusive personality. But what you find out is so many people just don't care. And they just look the other way. And I agree with Wolfie when he says, I'd rather them do it on their time than mine, right? Like, if I'm going to sit and play a game with someone, it's great they're willing to out themselves, but I'd almost rather not have to spend my time dealing with them when they do it. Yeah, well, pretty much. Yeah, and that's that's kind of where I'm at with it, though, sometimes, unfortunately, people have to out themselves that publicly for anyone to believe it. And that's still a thing. And I still know people who have been abused and who have been treated badly by people like Jeff Mock or other people with similar, or, with political figures, without going down a rabbit hole, certain political figures who are out there. And there are still people who just don't believe it. And I'm like, in some cases there's literal evidence. And I'm thinking interpersonally. People I know, there's literal evidence that these people have behaved really badly and nobody cares. Or enough people don't. And not enough people care. People who are willing to press charges haven't been directly affected. And that's often the case, sadly. But I mean, this still stems into it, because in the case of a GM who is effectively an abusive personality, even if we consider it mildly abusive, exactly what evidence. I mean, I think a lot of these issues with game masters come from an insecurity. They come from a power issue. They come from all these other things, And I think it's the same kinds of personalities, and obviously not to the extreme. Like, not everybody is a molester. Who not every bad GM is a molester or a horrible person in real life. But I think a lot of what happens is that you get this filter over of power issues, and that's why some game masters act like that. And again, I've seen more than a few. I've seen more than a few where I've kind of left a game or walked away from a table and I'm like, why is anyone still playing with that person? I mean, I even got that way with Ransdale, where I just stopped going to his games because I was like, You know, I mean, I liked hanging out with everybody else, but I was like, I'm not gonna pay to go play this guy's game when you're just like being in plain English shit on the entire weekend. You know, why is anybody doing this? You know, how does he have 80 people signing up to do this? So I think that's, and again, like we've all said, you know, just in case it ever comes back on me, I haven't talked to the guy in 20 years, and everybody has told me he's really changed as a human. In the last interaction that I had briefly with him quite a long time ago, he was definitely different. You know, something had changed, and I was like, cool. You know, I was like, cool. You're, you know, obviously something has changed in your life, and you're not that person, and that's great. So, unlike Jeff, who's still a horrible human. And the other guy I mentioned who ran the game with the sexual assault, I have no idea what even happened to him. I have no idea if he's even still around. I haven't talked to that guy in years. Not since that game, where I kind of just checked out and was like, yeah, I think we're not going to go hang out with this guy. But there's another type of extra GM I was thinking of in this description. Like, how about the game master that expects way too much from players? Right? Like that, it is that extra? Like, if you have this, and I think Curzon and I talked about this very briefly in, yep, yeah, so Wolf's got some stories, where I had a player, a student who I talked about signing up to play on an online game, and the game master just sent them back this sheet of like Q&A, and like basically seeing if they're qualified to play their online game that they were also charging for. So that's where I was kind of like, wait, this guy's charging you, and he's like screening you, you know. Now, on one hand, I'm like, dude, really? On the other hand, I've played plenty of convention games, not con games. I may have played a few of those in my life. But convention games where I've walked away like from a group of players and I'm like, they like didn't get any of it. Like they barely like died through the adventure, you know? So, but again, if you're charging to run a game and somebody signs up, that's when I turn it around and I say, well, it's kind of your responsibility as the game master to make sure that what you're doing suits the players and vice versa. So, should the person have sent them a 20-page, well, I don't know if it's 20 pages, whatever, even a 2-page questionnaire? I don't know. You know, I mean, maybe that's an expectation issue. Maybe that's they just want a certain type of player. Now, Curzon and I talked, and you know, we've both talked about streaming games professionally, and that's the other thing too. Like, if you're gonna stream games professionally and expect to turn it into a business, which I think is a really far shot anyway, but I mean, if it's gonna be part of, you know, game design or whatever, then you do need a certain level of player there, who's going to be participative, who's going to be interactive, who's going to work to solve the adventure and not work against the game master. But I don't know if that was the intent here, and I don't know, you know, I don't know. So you all tell me, what are some of your extra? Are they paying to play? Are they paying to apply, or only paying if accepted? They were only paying if accepted, not paying to apply. That'd be such a racket. That'd be like being a college, right? Or a gallery. Oh, I'll charge you $30 to see if I'll let you in. Oh boy, that would be a racket, right? I'm sure someone's doing it. Probably one of the celebrity gamers that recently got panned at a convention for, again, abusive behavior to subordinates and players, and you know. Yeah, no. I mean, if they only paid to play the game if they were accepted. So, I mean, the other thought is, as a game master who's putting a huge amount of work into a game, maybe you only want players who are going to bother to fill out this questionnaire. Well, right. So PJ, yeah. Let me scroll back up because this is getting good. this is what we want. This is what we want to see. So PJ, yes, having been in this situation, that's like being accepted to play a concert and then being told only if your band sells this many tickets, otherwise you have to pay me. Yeah, no, like that's the one line any band I've been in has ever drawn. Like, as soon as anyone starts to pay to play stuff, we're like, yeah, no, No. We might not make anything, but we're definitely not paying you to show up. Which, by the way, is one of my big issues with several events that I used to frequent that have a policy now have instituted policies similarly. So I kind of cryptic comments here and there on Facebook about why I'm not involved in certain things anymore. There's definitely been a trend to that. But anyway, that's another discussion. So Curzon, so yeah, we talked about this when you guys were down at one point. After trying to play with strangers and Roll20 D&D games that I paid for, I would have questions for any player that I GM for. The main reason is because things like knowledge, play style, even technical resources, good internet connection will affect the game and other players' experiences and their playing too. So that absolutely is true. And I like I said, I've not been shy about this idea that I've been thinking about when I get back from Germany in a few weeks of starting the pay for play thing. You have to make sure that people who sign up to play are not going to disrupt other people. And especially if you're even thinking of using it as a record of your game mastering ability, going back to teaching, when you're being observed in the classroom and the technology goes down, when you're being observed for a formal observation and technology goes down, or half the class walks in late, those are the things that, they totally F you over, Well, so that's the other thing. And then there's that goes to the overdoing it, the GM overdoing it. There are GMs who want you to do these crazy puzzles and mysteries without any benefit to the character knowledge, roles, skills. And that is a whole other issue. And that goes with the unrealistic GM overdoing it, the expectation end of it. And I have definitely been that person in my past. If Blake were here, I'm sure he could point out certain adventures in which I had very high expectations for my players, but I did not give them perhaps sufficient information. If he's listening, he's twitching right now. Again, that was experience too. That was my own lack of experience as a game master. That was being, 19 or 16 or whatever running these games. That's when you're charging someone to play, it's a different game. So I've only been running for friends, so it's generally been a situation of just playing to get together and have fun. If people were paying me to do it, I would absolutely have a vetting process. So I think that, yeah, exactly. And after talking to Curzon about his experiences, and after even with some of my own experiences at conventions, I think you absolutely do have to. Well, right, we did this with, you guys did this, because I was only peripherally involved. With Necropolis, there was definitely PC screening, but I know there was also player screening. And I remember that, because I was at some of those meetings, where there were certain players where we immediately knew this person, because of the way they interacted or answered questions or had been in another game, were going to be a problem for everybody. And there is no point having people there who are going to be a problem for everybody. So yeah, character backstory and personality I have less of a thing on now, and this is where I used to be much more unreasonable. I talked about backstory one night when my whole joke was no one cares about your character backstory. Of course I care about character backstories, but at the same time I feel that the backstory and personality can develop during the game sessions, whereas the player personality, I think, is something we have to establish up front, especially if other people are paying to play the games. Well, right. And so, we thought we were, Necropolis thought it was living the high life by charging, $35 a player for a weekend? There are LARPs now charging $3,500 for a weekend. Now, guaranteed, that includes accommodations and that includes all, meals and all these benefits. But think about that. Like, you've got to really make sure that anybody who walks in, and $3,500 is a lot. Like, several LARPs I've been involved with are charging in the mid hundreds. Like more than I ever pay to play a LARP. No offense to my friends running them now, but again, I'm just not as invested in playing in a LARP that I would pay that amount of money. But it includes accommodations, it includes meals. It's a whole package, so I get it. But and they're worth it, by the way. The scenery is amazing. The stories have a lot of work in them. There's a lot of attention to individual players and characters. It's not like I feel that anyone's paying too much. I want to say that up front because the people who run them are very good. But again, imagine like paying $600 for a LARP, and then you haven't vetted and you have players who are problems. You know, it's like, let's see. Yes, well, they and you know what, and this definitely comes into what I was saying that years ago, levels of acceptability and behavior, PEDs were very different, and I know people got away with stuff at games and even in my games, at some of these public events that I would never allow today. You know, and I don't think anybody here would. Um, so yeah, I've seen Jen post about that, and that's pretty cool about the after school LARP thing, and and yeah, and I saw her notes about teenage chats today. I can't even imagine. I can't imagine being younger in this digital age. Like, man, like wow, the stress and the pure interactions. So let's see, Nikki. Jamie in our Bulldogs game was basically taking us to each character's home planet. So yeah, well that I absolutely see. So, but I think that's still different than if Jamie were to, or if you were to, or if I were to run a game online for strangers publicly. And I agree. Like I'd like to have a player that knows a little something, knows enough to flesh out a character and talk about a character. In any of my games, even if I were to run a hack and slash dungeon crawl, I would want some sort of interaction between the players and interaction with NPCs. And I'd like to at least know players are capable of that. Even if they don't have deep backstories, you know, if I were to interview a player or talk to a player before a game. Now there was a point quite a while ago that I had an open thing on, I think it was meetup.com, talking about a blast from the past, to meet up for games, most of which were horrendously unsuccessful because for all these things we're talking about. But I got to the point I started sending out a questionnaire for that, you know, because and I still got players who once they got in the game were totally incompatible with each other, with me, with anything I wanted to do as a game master. So it's really difficult. It's extremely difficult. So something that Wolfie brought up, one example of a GM overdoing it in terms of expectation is having all kinds of crazy puzzles and things for players to solve that don't reflect the character world. So, you know, I used to be the game master who thought I was so clever for having these riddles in the game and having these puzzles in the game. And it was actually when I was working with Curzon on the Blight Realm stuff that I did the serious reevaluation of that. And when I did a lot of reading on contemporary game development and game theory, and the trend is that, and I've adopted this fully, there should be nothing in a game that the characters cannot solve. That expecting players to be like, you know, Bilbo and the Hobbit and solve these riddles you throw at them that have no context to the players or no context to the characters. And I think that there is this tendency for game masters to have that, oh, I'm so smart, let's see if I can, you know, get you to do this and think like this. And again, I think the spirit's there, and I never did any of that maliciously. You know, I never did that with I always thought it'd be interesting for the players to solve this stuff or you know, evade this trap, but it means nothing if it's something their character couldn't do. Yeah, don't make your levers hard to find. Yeah, right, exactly. Make them hard to pull. That's an excellent analogy, and that's kind of how I deal with any kind of puzzle, riddle, etc. in a game that I develop at this point. Like, I don't want this to be about me tricking you as a player. You know, once you find that there is a challenge. Yes, I like to give a little bit of a mental puzzle because I think some players do really thrive that, but it should be solvable by characters. Your character's skills, your character abilities, your character knowledge. This is where I kind of like the idea of and several games use it, the equivalent of an idea roll. You know, give the character based on some attribute or based on luck, whatever, some chance to be able to get some clarity out of the situation. Because the one thing I've learned the past 3 years or so now of steadily running for a group, none of whom are interested in loot, none of whom are interested really in, I mean, they like the level, of course, everybody does. Everybody likes loot, everyone likes level. They're not really, that's not their focus, but their focus is feeling successful in the game. Feeling like they're achieving in the game world, and interacting in the game world. They all get so much more out of it when they feel like their characters are actually succeeding. When they feel like they're being challenged and then they're succeeding. Not that they're being tricked. You know, and I think a lot of the early tropes of these games from fantasy literature, from whatever, was this idea of, you know, the character or the player having to test their wit against the game master to solve this. And I think that's another element of unrealistic expectation. How about others? Anyone have any other ideas for unrealistic expectations? Game masters overdoing it with their expectations. Anyone have a game master demand a 20-page backstory? I haven't, and I've certainly never done that. I used to be a lot, you know, more annoying about the 8 or 10 times I can solve whodunit watching those procedurals. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and it's also because there's no context, right? And also, let's face it, most game masters aren't nearly as clever as we think we are when presenting this information. To get somebody to solve a puzzle, you have to really present a clear picture of a problem, a solution, and all the dynamics that go around it. Like if you look at an escape room, you know, like the whole key to a good escape room is that there is enough there for a person to put together under stress. Oh, I've absolutely, yeah, sure. I've absolutely given people way too much to read on player characters. And again, I've even kind of joked, like I said, that the group that I most recently ran for at the peak was 7 players. I've absolutely just said to them, okay, you know I'm not going to actually get to use all this, right? And that's only because I have 7 players around the table. I mean, you know, you just can't. This goes back to our backstory conversation. But like I said, I have NPCs that I've written 4 and 5 pages on. That no one will ever see it. No one will ever know this. Did I overdo it? Absolutely. Did it hurt the game? No. It was interesting. There was one situation where a character did end up talking to those NPCs, and he referenced something from the town's history, and then the player followed up with a question, and then some of the history did come out, and they were like, wow, you actually thought of that? I'm like, yeah, you know, I did. I thought it would be important for this NPC if you actually did talk to him. And by the way, it was only a slim chance they ever got to talk to this person, but they made it a point to. And they had a character that could do it. Like it was a person of station. They'd have a character in a particular position of power to do it. So again, it's definitely a case where that paid off. That level of preparation did. I have run into, I remember there were a couple online games I looked at back in the old days of the internet when things were done by email and websites. There was one that I was going to play, and I think it was a World of Darkness game. And the storyteller wanted like a minimum 5-page backstory. Which, by the way, for me is not an issue. I'm like, sure. You know? Okay. But to me now, looking back at that, sitting there and thinking, asking someone to do that, to play a game online with a complete stranger who you're never going to, you know, have a long-term connection with unless the game really progresses. And of course that game, I did play that game, and that game only lasted like, you know, 4 sessions or whatever. And that's a whole other discussion. That part of my issue with overdoing it as a player now and writing these you know, huge things as a player now also comes in that there's Wendell. Hey, how's it going? Good to see you. All right, let's scroll back. We've got some good stuff coming up. So, all right, I've encountered just overly simplistic GMs who insist that their view on the game should be played was the only valid one. So yeah, we talked a little. Yeah, my experience has been that pretty much all faults grow from life. So that's interesting. That because we actually did talk a little bit about this. We talked about the GM as author versus storyteller, and we all have case examples, including some of our good friends who run novels. They don't run RPGs. They run novels. And you're kind of just stuck. And I have no problem. Yeah, no, you're good. But I didn't actually we didn't actually discuss the active listening part of it. And I mean, I would argue that that's the source of most conflicts today, universally, right? That you don't actually listen to what someone else says. You're hearing them say what you want them to say or don't want them to say. So I would argue that, but I think that that's part of it, and I think that's also part of it that a lot of these GMs are in their own head and they don't actively listen. Glad you made it. Haven't seen you in a couple weeks. I think you were lurking at some point. I think I said that you were lurking at some point, but I haven't actually gotten to talk in a couple weeks. So Curzon never had a game master ask anything really extravagant. All right, catch you later, Wolfie. Yeah, we'll be rolling on for a little bit later. Good seeing you. Hope to see you again. We'll have another one of these next week, and I'll have a few more work sessions. Then I'll be away for another 2 weeks. So, yeah, I'll let everybody know what's going on. So let's see. Curzon, nope, never had it. I finally begun to limit my character to about a page. Me too. In fact, even less. As a GM, I now use very specific backstory requirements to provide a small list of information from a couple of events. So that's, if you remember the persona details that I give out for Tales, that's how I'm treating it now. And I have them have tangible game effects. So if the player bothers to write the paragraph about their favorite item they lost as a child or whatever, if that can come into play either through recollection, either through thinking they know where the item is, they actually get tangible benefits in the game. That to me prevents this backstory that's written up that I will never get to incorporate. So writing fiction is difficult. And I have grown to become keenly aware not everybody can do it. I've always done it. I take it for granted, like a lot of people who are creative. I tend to be like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's easy. Write a page on your character. I have colleagues who are brilliant in their chosen field, visual arts and music, who writing is like this nightmare chore for them. And I guess I just never thought of that, like they're so sophisticated in the visual or in the musical, far more than I'll probably ever be in either of those, frankly. Even though I have training, they're really, but writing, they're like, you can just write 3 pages. I'm like, yeah, no big deal. They're like, and I consider them really brilliant. So it's definitely not a flaw if you can't write a backstory. I think prompts are a better way to handle it now. And I think it's less demand on everybody. Yeah, no, and so like with Wendell, yeah, I agree too. Tells players to play make-believe incorrectly. Well, that's an ongoing discussion. That goes from gaming to opinions on fantasy movies. I won't dig up any of the recent hot topics tonight on chat regarding certain adaptations of certain works that people are all upset about because of changes. When you're dealing with something that is effectively not real anyway. And again, I can argue both sides of this, by the way. But because I can argue if there's actually a paradigm that has been laid out as canon, changing it arbitrarily is just not necessary, but it's not wrong. Like we'll just use a very hopefully non-hot button example here. Now you can do it, but if those of us who've been playing these games for a while remember when you couldn't make a halfling magic user, or you couldn't make a dwarf magic user, like my thought was always, why would okay, yes, that's what it says in this book, but why would I let a player not, okay, maybe when I was really younger I would stick to it and be like, no, you can't, the book says you can't play a dwarf magic user. But I think all of us got to a certain point where we're like, is the person going to have fun playing your stupid dwarf magic user? Then go ahead and play it. Yeah, back when your class was off. But even later, even in first ed D&D, and even up to second ed, there were still these class restrictions that were kind of arbitrary, in my opinion. Yeah, and you know what? And again, this extends into all these conversations that are going on now in terms of the correct interpretations of everything from The Little Mermaid to Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, look, I can argue this. Like, you want me to argue this from a lore perspective? I can argue it. But in the end, it's a world that should grow, that should change, you know. Let's see. Don't know how to actually have conversations about active listening and positive. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, Wendell. I'm sure you probably agree. And we probably have talked about this. But a lot of gamers, you know, before today's more enlightened day and age, were very neuroatypical. And we didn't know that. We didn't have a term. We didn't have terms for being on the spectrum or whatever, ADD, whatever, self included, by the way. We just, that's the reason why I think a lot of gamers did have this tendency to shut down and discuss things unidirectionally. Because part of it is the programming and the wiring, and the fact that two people with two completely different neural patterns aren't going to be able to see that same middle ground in reality. And I think gamers who are notoriously eccentric and notoriously have that atypical way of interacting, I think that's where a lot of the issues, and even some of the issues we've discussed tonight in terms of that, thinking that things are only going to be one way in a game. Some of it's just personality. I mean, yeah, we've talked about that too, where several of us know personalities. Yes, they don't learn it while interacting with other people. So Curzon, you know, I had this conversation with Mr. Crosby and with you, and the biggest hurdle I had with my 2D game design students was getting them to sit down and play a board game together. They had no clue. It's not they didn't want to. Many of them literally did not have the social skills to sit down and play a board game together. They all play online. But I said, when you play online, do you ever play with other people in the room who are playing the same game? No. I said, this is why we're doing this, because you have to understand the experience you've had up until now has been very unidirectional. Don't even get you started, right? Exactly. And again, I don't diss video gaming. Video gaming is great. I don't do it a lot myself these days, but I have noticed a lot of younger gamers, the big mind blow for them is sitting down at a tabletop RPG and realizing, unless they get stuck with a game master who's totally unrealistic, oh wait, I'm not restricted in what I can do. I can talk to these other people at the table. We can do something together, you know, like that has really been an eye-opener for me. Now, again, I do get a lot of people who are D&D players who have now really embraced pen and paper RPG, which is part of the reason why I'm thrilled, even though I know I bust on all of the pop culture stuff. I'm really thrilled about all of this being pop culture, because I'd rather people who are interested be able to access it, be able to play it, be able to come here and chat about it. And I have several students who have not wanted to come on here, but who text me regularly or chat regularly with me about RPGs, about their characters, about, you know, their gaming experience or whatever. And I think it's great. And I think it's great they've had no, like, inhibition or shame to show me their D&D tattoo. You know? I'm like, cool. You know? I'm like, first of all, it's cool you picked me out right away, and you're like, yeah, you know, this guy will get it, you know? I'm going to show you my character, you know? And so I'm like, yeah, well, that didn't take very long. You know, you picked me out. Well, not even a game design class. Like, I'm talking like in a photo class. Like, yeah, that didn't take very long. You picked me right out. So I think it's very cool. I think it's very cool that that's not a thing. And again, I think some of the things we talked about tonight, as far as what we consider, again, some of it was very much personal discussion, like, is this too much preparation? You know, and I think the consensus is, if the game master really enjoys this deep preparation, as long as they don't force their players to interact with it, right? As long as they don't make it a thing that it has to be part of their game, whether the players want it or not, which we all have experiences like that. I think that's one thing. But I think a lot of I hope some of the issues that we see or that we've experienced as far as one extremely abusive game masters, that sort of overreach that we did discuss. Well, I think focused. So focused gaming. What do you mean by that? Let's go in that. Let's define that. Or how do you define it? Not let's define, but how do you define it? But yeah, what I was saying is I think it's great that people now are able to play these games, and I think hopefully a broader group of people playing them will lead to one more awareness of when you're overstepping and making other people miserable, you know, or players having the power to say, I don't like this game, you know. All right, catch you later, Curzon. Thanks. Yeah, it was great talking to you. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So again, I know you keep, I know you just keep on, but we did actually talk about that too. That I think a lot of this comes in. We were talking about online gaming, where players are handed questionnaires before they get into a game, and I've had several players complain about it. Like, oh, why does the game master need to know all this stuff from me before I go and step into their online game, especially if it's a pay for play game? And I'm like, well, if you have six other people in the game, you all have to make sure the game master can very easily set up a dynamic that is unpleasant, uncomfortable, not fun. Yeah, forget uncomfortable, just not fun if he doesn't know what everybody wants. And yeah, so I said this. So when I sat down for Tales to do the Tales play tests, character creation on Sunday, okay, these are all people I've now been playing with for years. One of whom I'm playing with for 20 years, but the other two I've been playing with for 4 years. Um, And I sat down and I said, okay, it's going to be this type of scenario. It's going to last this long. It's going to have these elements. I suggest making characters that work with that. You can make anything you want. I'm not going to tell you no. But at the same time, if you're, a barbarian with a metal faceplate, stapled to their the man in the iron mask thing who can't interact with anybody is miserable because they're in this social environment for 4 game sessions. We have to establish this up front. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's entitlement. It's entitlement with time. Yeah, no one had who they want to play with. Oh, we're at a point now that there's so many different games and gamers out there. I think everybody has the right to decide what game they want to play and who they want to play it with. And again, I don't think there's any thing wrong with the game master laying it out as to what type of game they want to run. And I think it's fine if players, and as I said, I am thrilled if a person says, I don't think I'm going to play because I don't think I'm going to like that game. Great. Great. Because you're not wasting your time. You're not wasting my time. Not wasting the time of 3 other players. You're not frustrating anybody. And again, I made it very clear to say, this is me at a point in life that I've done a lot of things. I've done a lot of different things. I've gamed a long time. I've been a teacher now. My enlightenment on this comes from experience too. And the experiences I had and probably delivered at an earlier point in my life would have been very different. And in fact, like I said, if a few of my old time players came on tonight, they'd be like, "But what about that time you did this to us?" And a lot of that it comes from maturity, it comes from security, personal security, and all those things. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has the right to say, I don't want to play that game, or I don't want to play with this person. I talked about, if you watch this stream later, I talked about a game master quite a long time ago at a con who the language he used at the table and the scene he portrayed was sexually abusive towards a player and towards a player's character. But the player was at that time a woman identifying, And it was clear that it was something creepy, right? Um, and there was a time where a lot of players put up with stuff like that because your pool of who to play with was extremely limited. Not to mention culturally, it was not something that got called out. You know, now I don't think that person would ever show up at a convention again. Which is good. By the way, I don't think that game master. I think the word would spread very quickly about that game master and doing really creepy stuff, and hopefully they would not be invited to play or run public events. So I think where we're at now is so different than where we've been at historically with these games. And we've got another tale for me. Another anything else they want to share? Good to see you, Wendell. Glad hope things are okay. My schedule's been a little chaotic too. I mean, you've probably seen the posts, but I've had a lot of ups and downs since I got back from Norway. So my schedule's been erratic. Hopefully, I'll be on to do another chat like this next week. Come up with another thrilling topic. Yeah. No, it's good. Well, busy's fine. Busy's good. Yeah, it's been a crazy couple weeks. Like one of my acquaintances that I'd run into at the when we were overseas at the festival, who does business stuff that's adjacent to this. We've been for like 2 weeks. Like, okay, we've really got to connect and talk about some of our ideas, and it hasn't happened. Hopefully this weekend, but it just hasn't happened. And they're like, I'm really sorry. I really want to talk, but I'm like, hey, it's been a little nuts. It's been a little crazy. All right. Well, good chat. Wonderful chat, everybody. Great to see everybody. People who've been on lurking. Thanks for lurking. People who've been chatting. Great for chatting. A couple of people have already had to drop off. So pull this up. Whoops. And we'll pull the Freeway, the old school game master. Talk about controversial. I'll just step back to that. Talk about game master overreach. There's this old school dungeon master's guide with all this lurid early 80s sword and sorcery imagery going on. Conan-esque. Franz Frazetta and very Boris Vallejo type imagery going on. That today I'm sure would not fly in publication. Maybe in certain circles. So there's kind of a resurgence of this sort of imagery now. But all in all, they've tried to make it a little bit less male gaze, which again I think is good. I think it's good. We want different people, all kinds of people to play our game, not just us old dudes. So yeah, from the tomes here on Twitch. If you're on Twitch, feel free to go subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll be having some exclusive content coming up, hopefully in the next couple months. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to drop by Twitch and sign up. You can be involved in these chats with the finest minds in gaming, at least the people who come onto the channel, who are the finest minds. FoxandBoardGames.com, at FoxandBoardGames on social media. Thanks a lot for subscribing. Also, I'm going to say again, for the month of September, especially if you have a Amazon Prime subscription, you can get a free subscription to this channel. The following is one step subscription. The next is the next step, and subscribers will be getting some benefits. I haven't sat down and really worked it out. I mean, sometimes just little badges or little pictures I'll put up there. Thanks for being a subscriber. But I do want to start creating a little bit of custom content for subscribers, and maybe a couple special chats for subscribers. So we will work on that. But if you happen to have a Prime subscription and you want to jump in, September, next 2 weeks is the time to do it. Thanks for following. Thanks for supporting. I absolutely can't be doing this regularly without everybody's support. So I definitely appreciate it. And I'll be on tomorrow, continuing to work on the game material. And for everybody else, have a good night.